Hi, everyone. This is Mike Leiden here with my guest today is Tom Campbell. I am a teacher and volunteer at the International Academy of Consciousness New York office, and going to ask Tom a few questions about his upcoming talk at the First International Congress of Conscientiology, which is happening at the IAC's research campus in Portugal on May 22nd to the 24th, actually just next month. So the purpose of this Congress is so first off, International Congress of Conscientiology. Conscientiology means consciousness science. So it's a multidimensional paradigm for the study of consciousness. Multidimensional means studying all aspects of the person. So that can mean studying the brain, or as perspectives from neuroscience as they relate to consciousness, perspectives related to out-of-body experiences, or certain psychic experiences that we can have, or mind-matter interaction effects. Any of these can be considered under the umbrella of this multidimensional or post-materialistic model. So Tom Campbell, for those of you who don't know who Tom is a former physicist by trade. Well, you are a physicist, I should say, but
Yes.
you worked for NASA formerly.
Yes.
And your second life, let's say, was you were one of the first individuals to work with Robert Monroe, kind of as a protege. Would that be accurate?
Yes, that's true. Back in, actually, I started both careers at about the same time. I started my first job out of graduate school as a working physicist, and within several months of starting that job, I met Bob Monroe, who was just put up a laboratory to study consciousness, and he needed scientists to help him do the research, and I happened to be at the right place at the right time, so that's when I started researching consciousness. So that was, like I say, in early 70s is when that happened. Now, that was before there was a TMI, the Monroe Institute. That was just Bob and I and a few other people who were engaged in studying consciousness.
Gotcha. And so since that time, you've been having out-of-body experiences, or now you would say just exploration of what you would call the larger consciousness system, or other dimensions of consciousness that are just as real as the physical. And after about, correct me if I'm wrong, 30 years of research in that area, you published the My Big Toe trilogy.
That's right.
Yep.
Being a physicist, when I worked with Bob, my job was to figure out how did it work, what was going on, what's the theory that will explain this, some logical structure that made sense. And after a year or so with Bob Monroe, out of body I could do whenever I wanted to. It was an easy thing to do on demand, and I used that ability to do research in the non-physical as well as we were doing research in the physical. So I had both areas in which I could experiment and do work. And it's a hard problem. So it took me about 35 years or so of doing this research in both places, both realms, before I thought I knew enough about it to actually write it down and share it with other people. And that then happened, I think, 2003.
Gotcha. And so actually the name of your talk is A New Perspective, in which well, I'll read the whole title. In this talk, you're going to address some hard problems, but your talk is A New Perspective, a theory of consciousness in which the hard problems of both consciousness and modern physics disappear as the informational nature of reality gains support within the physics community. So just without giving the audience, I guess, without giving too much away, what question do you aim to answer in this talk at the International Congress of Conscientiology?
Well, what I'd like to bring to the table is that consciousness, as well as many things in physics, basic things like mass and charge and space and time, and there's a little longer list than that, but these are fundamental things, and they are also hard problems. Physicists don't know where, time comes from. What is it? Where does it come from? Why is it there? Then the same with mass, the same with charge. all of the most fundamental things in physics are mysterious hard problems. They have no causal chain. They just are. And of course, consciousness is the same way. Consciousness doesn't have a causal chain. Where does consciousness come from? What is going on in and out of body or in these psychic experiences? What's the mechanism? What's happening? And the reason we have these hard problems, and the reason that anyone ever ends up with fundamental hard problems, is because we're looking at the problem from the wrong direction. It's a paradigm issue. Once you look at the problem from a more productive viewpoint, in other words, you modify your paradigm, then all these hard problems just disappear. And not only do the hard problems of consciousness disappear, but physics disappear, and of philosophy and theology. All of the hard problems that we've been scratching our head on for thousands of years suddenly become obvious once you have this bigger picture understanding of how reality really works.
Right, right. So it's almost like you're saying that the hard problems almost exist because we're construing the problem in a certain way. In other words, if I ask a question like, well, how does consciousness emerge from the brain? And then everybody's working on that problem, it becomes a hard problem because that's the wrong question.
Right. Well, yes, the question, consciousness doesn't come from the brain. So trying to figure out how it does is going to be a hard problem because there is no answer. So yes, we're only looking for answers under paradigms or in places, where no answers exist. Mm-hmm. That's what makes it a hard problem. And it's the same with the charge and the mass and the time and so on. They are hard problems because we are making assumptions. We have beliefs, and those assumptions and beliefs basically cut us off from a good deductive scientific understanding.
Got it. And with regard, and so it sounds like you're saying that this is significant to consciousness research because you're proposing a paradigm shift.
Yes.
Is that right? So it's a paradigm shift that's different than, so it incorporates quantum mechanics and relativity, or let's say maybe accounts for those, but is not how can I say, it's not those, or it's not under the materialist lens.
No, it's not at all. Matter of fact, I was as surprised as anybody, being a physicist, that when I finally thought I understood consciousness and how consciousness worked and had an overarching theory of that, it took me by surprise as well that when I looked at it, I had the exact same overarching understanding that I had derived for consciousness also explain quantum mechanics, also explain relativity. Why is C a constant? Why do particles, why are they really probability distributions, which is what the science of quantum mechanics starts with, that assumption that they're really not hard little massive particles, but they're probability distributions. That's how they deal with particles and things in quantum mechanics. So then I realized that the big picture I had of consciousness and metaphysics, if you will, actually derived physics, answered the fundamental hard problems of physics as well, and made the physics we have now, the materialist view of physics, became a subset. And it still works, obviously. It's a subset, but it's a subset under the condition of low uncertainty. So where we are dealing with things that have very little uncertainty, then we can approximate objectivity and a material viewpoint. Just like with the flat Earth, as long as we're talking about small distances, well, a flat Earth is a good approximation. And just if we're talking about Newtonian physics, well, if your thing that you're trying to describe with Newtonian physics is going too fast or isn't too small, well, then Newtonian physics works fine. But if it is too fast or too small, then Newtonian physics breaks down. Well, if our science does start to want to ask questions and understand things that have larger uncertainties associated with them, then materialism breaks down. So our physics became a subset. of a larger understanding of the nature of reality, and it fit very, very well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting. Um, I'm tempted to ask a question, if it can be answered quickly. That uh, so how does your talk relate to out-of-body experiences without without spoiling too much?
Well, an out-of-body experience is an experience of consciousness, if you will. They're related. Obviously, you are conscious when you're out of body. That's why you have the experience. If you were unconscious, you wouldn't have an experience. So consciousness and out of body are very much related. It's an attribute of consciousness that it can explore, and by explore I mean experience multidimensional, reality. These I call virtual realities. There's many different kinds of virtual realities, and our physical universe is just one of them. But they are all products of consciousness. They're all, incorporated within this larger theory of consciousness. So as consciousness, you have access to all of consciousness, and that includes out of body, that includes the dream state, that includes all of what people call this multidimensional reality, and they just give it that name because it's not physical. Therefore, it's this multidimensional reality. Well, we can understand that. You see, we know what out of body, what's going on there, what's the mechanism, why do you get the things that you get when you study it? Why is it that people see and do and feel and report the things they do? And what does it mean, and how can you interpret it? And sometimes they're like where they can be near Earth and they can see what's going on here in this physical reality, and sometimes it's very different than that. And sometimes there seems like there are multiple realms out there that aren't the same and have different aspects to them. And why is that? And where do they come from? And what are they actually, what are they interacting with? What's there? Where does it come from? What's its origin? What's the causal chain that leads to all of that stuff and that experience? Just like asking what's the causal chain that leads to our experience here in physical reality. When you're out of body, there's also a causal chain that leads to your experience. And if you understand how it works, then you see that chain. And now the experience, instead of mystical or, oh, wow, I wonder what that means, you know what it is, where it comes from, and what it means.
I see. So your model explains multidimensionality as well as quantum physics as well as relativity theory.
Yes.
It sounds really ambitious, and I'm really excited for the talk. And I know that for those of you who don't know or not familiar with Mr. Campbell's work here, Tom has written about an 800-page trilogy that explains this model, as well as you've got several videos. Actually, not several. You've got over in the hundreds, right? Videos on YouTube.
About 220 videos on YouTube
explaining this work. And so if you want to learn more about that, you can look on Tom's video channel on YouTube. It's TWCJRR44. Is that it?
That's right.
Okay. On YouTube, or you can go to mybigtoe.com. If you want to learn more about the Congress at which Tom will be speaking in May, you can look at the links below or go to icc.iacworld.org if you want more information or to register. Tom, thank you so much. As always, it's been a pleasure, and I will see you there at the Congress.
Great. Well, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure.
Okay.